In Mesopotamia, there is this creation story. In the creation story is that the lesser gods were tired of caring for the earth. They were frustrated in the agriculture for the sacrifices. They were frustrated with the shepherding of the animals. They were frustrated with the gathering all of the grapes for the wine, and frustrated with the having to navigate the rivers, and they were mad. And so the lesser gods go to the main god, and they say this. They say, "Listen, we're done working. We don't want to work anymore. Like we just want to do, no, work is becoming beneath us." And so the Mesopotamian creation story is that these gods created man and woman to work because work was beneath God. And sadly, in our culture, that's how people feel. I hear it. I want to win the lottery so I can sit on a beach. For how long? Like, let's just say, you're going to be bored after a month. And I know what you're saying. You're like, "Oh, I'd like to try." The average American says, "I would give to the church if I could just make twice as much as I'm making now. Then I would have my resources figured out." Dear friend, if you can't figure it out now, all you're going to do is waste 2 times as much money. Did you know that in this great country in which we live, which there's a lot of freedoms, and you could really pursue to become anything that you would like to become, do you know the more money you make in the United States, the less money you give to nonprofits? The data is out there. We hate work. God doesn't. It's actually the only creation story where you see God putting his hands to work. God loved work. As a matter of fact, he loved creating so much that when he was done creating on one day, he said, "What? It is." Then he creates and he works another day. And when he's done on the second day, he says, "It is." And then he creates man and he goes, "We got to try again." And he created woman. And then he said, "It is." He created. The Bible in Hebrew paints this picture of God creating out of the existing resources, creating something. And then God invites man, created in his own image, to work. His desire is for you to glorify him through your work. Now, this is all not necessarily a part of the sermon. You're like, "You've already talked and you're on the clock." I realize that. This is what I hate. My heart is crushed. Because men and women hate Mondays. God never designed for you to hate Monday. He didn't. It crushes my heart. Because I know there are people in this room that we're praying for, they would just like a job. See, the life that you're living right now is somebody else's dream, and you take that for granted. God loves work. And weirdly enough to me, he invites us to rule and reign and subdue. It means to steward the life that you've been entrusted with. He wants you to steward it. So your job is not just a job, it's a calling. Whether you're slanging a wrench or whether you're navigating Excel spreadsheets, whether working in a hospital and you're wiping butts, but what you're called to do is worship. And that's the invitation from the Father. I met with a guy this week, or last week, before last, I was out of town most this weekend. He's just really struggling with the success of his business, or lack thereof. And we sat down and we talked, and I just said, "Hey, when's the last time you tithed?" I don't know the answer to that because I don't know who tithes and who doesn't. I know that if our leaders, the people that sit on our board, I know if they do or they don't. That's it. And he gave me this reason of why it's been since September. And I was like, okay. Man, we hit those seasons. I was like, what are you so frustrated about your work? He goes, my wife would really like to stay home from work. He said, we just can't do it. I said, man, that I'm sure it's a really tough prayer to pray. I said, do you want me to encourage you, or do you want me to just like give you some truth? He goes, I'm buying your coffee for truth. And I'm like, all right. I said, sell your house. Sell one of your cars. Downsize. Whatever you make off of the car that you sell, that's all that you spend on your second automobile so that you can have 2 automobiles. And then you downsize. You move out of that 3,000 square foot home that you have, and you downsize. And then she can. And he said, our lifestyle would be changed. I was like, well, then what you really don't want, you're not complaining about work. You're trying to make excuses about why you don't give. The Bible has a different story about work. The Bible says that our work is worship. How cool is that? The Bible says that we are to delight, care for, cultivate, develop. Creation was not a product to be consumed, but a project to be partnered with. So the focus of today's sermon is on worship. It's saved people who have been sozoed, made whole. Their desire outflowing from them is, how can I serve? I see it all the time. This place does what it does because so many people have been transformed by Jesus that they say, how can I serve? How can I worship? Now, I need you to hear my heart today. I believe that what I'm going to talk about is worship, and some of you are going to hear music, which is good. It is a part of worship. But what I want you to hear is I'm asking you today, how do you worship your spouse, with your spouse? Not making them an idol, okay? How do you worship with your spouse? How do you worship with your family? How do you worship with your career? How do you worship with your finances? How do you worship with your downtime? You were created to worship and to give all that you have to Jesus. Why? Because he is worthy of our worship. I won't read the text over us again. I'm just going to get into the meat today. We believe in this house that saved people serve people. In this series, Dust, we are giving you 7 qualifications, 7 markers, if you will, of spiritual growth. I don't want you to think that these markers save you. I'm not here to promise you that if you incorporate all 7 of these spiritual markers, all of a sudden life is going to be perfect. What I am saying is we look at the text, at the life of Jesus, following in the dust of the rabbi, and we see these 7 things in the scriptures for us to follow. And one of them is saved people, serve people. In this house, it's a part of our code. And by the code, I mean our core values. And so as a team, we've created a value and a win and a belief about the code. This is what we believe about people who've been born from above, people who have been saved. The value is sacrificial serving isn't something we do. It is an expression of who we are. The win is this. How we celebrate it as a team is when people actively, sacrificially serve those in their family, in the church, and in the community. And in your community, I mean your job. Here's the belief. We believe God wants to move us from self-serving to sacrificial serving. We become like Jesus when we serve others. We are called to die to our plans and our desires and live for Christ's plans and Christ's desires. It's through serving we model the life of Jesus and display the love of Christ to a broken world. You're like, Ronnie, I don't like so-and-so at my job. All right, serve them. Ronnie, you don't understand what I do. It's so exhausting. The last thing I want to do is worry about going out of my ways to serve other people. Serve them. Ronnie, you have no idea about the guy I married. Serve him. It is when women come to me, and they have over the years, and I always tell Ashley, I was like, I'll just wait to see what happens in that marriage. A woman will come to me and say, listen, I'm not going to walk in submission to my husband. Like, I know what Ephesians says, Pastor Ronnie, but there's no way that I can do that. You don't know he's this. They fill in the blank. I've heard it all. And I sit across this table with Ashley, and this is what I tell them. Just start serving him. And watch as God transforms his heart into a servant towards you. It happens over and over and over again. Why? Because we believe there is power in serving others. You have a kid that drives you bonkers? Serve them. In following in the dust of the rabbi, we realize that our God is worthy of our worship. We just had an experience, praise be to God. He is worthy of all that we can offer him. He is worthy. A disciple, remember the Hebrew word from week 1 is talmudim, a disciple of Jesus, a pupil. A good English word that John Mark Comer uses all the time is apprentice. He says that we should be apprenticing with Jesus. I love that. It's probably the better translation of the Greek word matateo. It is to disciple, to walk with him. So we, as followers of him, see everything as an opportunity to worship. I'm either worshiping myself, and I'll become a stingy, greedy curmudgeon, right? Or I will serve others. And when I start serving others, I see opportunities to be generous. I see opportunities to give of myself. Every experience of life, Jesus said, we're to be worshiping in spirit and in truth. And when the world sees followers of Jesus who are willingly serving others, I believe that they begin to see the goodness of God. When they see people who overflow with joy, when they see people who walk in humble, surrendered life, I believe what happens is they become curious. Why would someone live that way? When groups of people who are following Jesus gather and just begin to celebrate the goodness of God, and overflowing is passion. And the world needs to see more people who see their lives as worship. So the movement, if you will, if we were to look at Jesus, this is what I'd say, is Jesus is worthy of our worship. He's worthy. I love this text. It says, worthy are you, O Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. You created all things, and by your will they exist and were created. I love the vision of heaven that we saw through the scriptures. These 24 elders, manly men, they were men. They were men. They gave their lives. I don't know who they are. I've read the conjecture, but all I know is that these men gave their lives to Jesus. They weren't afraid of death. They weren't afraid of persecution. Why? Because they had settled that their life was all about giving everything they could to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Friends, I don't necessarily mean that means at audacity, but you better be serving somewhere. I see the people in this house. There's people in this house that have retired, and I love them so much. They haven't retired. They've just given their lives and started serving other places. They volunteered at the hospital at hospice. Now, what you think they think? Should have. What I would think that they would do is coast off into the sunset. They have put in their time. And yet, I believe that they're probably giving more time to the kingdom of heaven and things that matter than they ever had the opportunity to do before. Why? Because the Bible doesn't know anything about retirement, y'all. They serve at hospice. They serve in ministries that feed homeless people. I watch these people give of their lives. Why? Because they're trying to earn heaven? No. Why? Because they're trying to make Jesus happy? No. They have been changed, been marked, and they live in a way of sacrificial service. Worship is masculine. It is masculine. Now listen, if you want to worship with your hands in your pockets, that's fine. But I'm telling you, when you encounter the King of Kings, the only thing that you're going to be able to do is say, you can have it all. Have all of me. Whatever you want is yours. When you have encountered what Christ has done for you, the only response that I can wrap my head around is, what can I not give you? Why? Because he's worthy of it all. To peek behind the curtain, we get to see humanity praising and worshiping God in heaven. And if worshiping God bores you on earth, then you, my friend, aren't going to like heaven very much. Now, I do not want you to think that you're going to become fat and chubby and grow wings and play a harp on a cloud, okay? We will learn. We will grow. I have a good feeling that I don't get to play golf anymore. My schedule doesn't allow me to. I'm going to try to play a few times this year. But I'll just tell you this, I'm going to become pretty proficient in heaven. I don't understand. Ashley and I, it doesn't appear that we're going to share a room, but I've prayed, God, would you let us share a door like at the hotel? You know what I'm saying? That door that we... And I'm going to lean in a room and I'm like, hey, I'm going to go golf because I'm going to perfect golf while I'm here. Hank's going to become a professional bowler or something. I mean, last time I played, he stomped me, and he still reminds me of it. Would you all pray for him? And what I'm saying is, it's not going to be a boring place, but there will be worship in heaven. Every creature worshiping. Now, I'm going to give you some worship warnings, and I'm going to do these fast. I just want you to be aware of these. I want you to do this. One, beware of the business of worship. We try to create freedom in worship, but I want to be careful that you're not doing something just because you have to do. I want you to know about worship. Let me give you another warning. Some people will not get it, and that's okay. They won't understand why you'd be willing to give of your life. They won't understand why you volunteer your time. They won't understand why you take a tenth off of the top and give it to the kingdom of heaven, because you trust that God can do with more with your 90% than you can with your 100%. And you just learn to trust him almost recklessly at some times. Why? Those people that aren't going to get it. Choose wisely what and who you worship. I want you to know that we actually discussed this in Roots, that worship is about the heart. It's spirit and truth. It's not about the location. Don't think that this is just the one time you're worshiping, one time a week. It's a lifestyle of saying, am I pleasing you? Am I honoring you? Am I giving to you? Am I loving my spouse the way that you're calling me to? Am I loving my children? Or am I making monsters, right? The way that you've asked me to. Follow Jesus. Know that it's a lifestyle of worship. Don't miss the chance to gather with God's family in worship. Let me just write this down. Worship is the lifestyle of a disciple. It is. Worship is the lifestyle. Now, I want to get practical just for a moment, and I want to give you some freedom today. So many people think that worship is about posture. And I want you to know that worship is a lifestyle. Every morning, and that sounded awfully braggy, most mornings I try, I sit in silence for just 10 minutes. I don't do anything. I usually begin with the Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And I just sit, and then I'm just silent. And occasionally I'll begin to sing, and I hope it sounds good to him. If anybody's awake in my house, it probably doesn't sound great to them, you know what I mean? And sometimes the scripture will just flow over me, and I'll just say, thank you for your word. And sometimes I'm like, God, are you even here? You guys know I lead transparently, whether that bothers you or not. Let me just tell you about last Saturday. It's been a long day, man. Been a long week. I am not a good traveler. I travel this week. I travel next week. And church, thank you. Thank you for letting me sit at tables with some of the most influential leaders in the world and talk about the future of the church. Next week's a training that I'm doing on helping churches discover how to plant churches. And I'm so thankful that, and so that you know, like we have an organization outside of Audacity that pays for me to do all of these things. I was so tired. And I said, God, I don't even know like if I can even do anything tomorrow. I said, God, I just need to know that you're with us. And I need to know that we're walking in the right way because there's some things going on fiscally. And I'm just like, God, are you in this? That morning, I woke up on Sunday morning, and I get up pretty early on Sunday morning. I got a text message. It was just from a friend of mine. It was a group text message, so I didn't let it count. But I just want you to know I did get this text message. And it said, hey, everybody, I'm praying for you. I'm praying that the Spirit of God comes into your service. And it was just a really encouraging text. And because I needed another fleece, I was like, okay, I see your text message, good Lord, but I mean, really. And on my way to the office, I get another text message from a friend of mine that's in Texas. And he said, Ronnie, I want you to know that I was just praying over you in Audacity this morning. And the Father told me what you prayed for last night, you're going to see happen today. And if you were here last week, you saw what happened. If you were here this morning, you saw what happened. I believe that it is an attitude of worship if you'll sit with the Father and say, hey, are you with me? Hey, am I walking in obedience? Hey, Father, am I honoring you? I also want you to know that I believe that you can encounter the living God sitting in the boat fishing. I think you can encounter the living God crocheting, gardening. I think you can encounter the living God walking on beaches. There's not a whole lot, although we boast that we have the most beaches. That's because we've created a bunch of lakes, okay? It's a fake beach, right? I mean, you can, whether you're walking, you can enjoy God's creation anywhere. You can find him in the art of beauty. Last week, Ashley and I, we celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. And yeah. You're like, oh, I'm going to start praying for her more. You should. And we decided to spend the day together and got an Airbnb, and then we just walked around a museum with no kids. It was amazing. We actually read everything. And we were just experiencing the goodness of God through art, through the expression of who he is. Yes, you can worship him at church, and I'm sure you have other ideas where you have encountered God, but the very nature is the workmanship of God. The nature of God, he wants to be enjoyed by you. So walking in the dust of the rabbi is walking in a lifestyle of worship. I believe that the Spirit of God is with us in a unique way when we gather. That's why the writer of Hebrews said, hey, don't forsake the gathering of yourselves together. And I believe that he was specifically speaking to synagogue worship, but I also believe he was saying, hey, don't neglect meeting at the table and growing in discipleship with one another. He's like, don't neglect that, because when we neglect that, we get off course. Jesus says this, for where two or three are gathered in my name, there I am among you. Did you know he's actually quoting the Mishnah? This is what it says in the Mishnah Avot. It says this, when two sit together and words of the Torah pass between them, the divine presence rests upon them. It's a common knowledge in Jesus' day, and Jesus says, no, when you gather, I am there. In the Mishnah Avot, it also says this, when three eat at one table and speak the words of Torah, it is though they have eaten at the table of God. Do not neglect being in biblical community. You're like, I thought this was about serving today. Yes, because when you're not here on a Sunday morning when we gather, listen, go on vacation. I want you to do that. I want you to enjoy. But please, for all things holy, if you're part of this house, don't not show up because you're tired. That's when you should show up. Don't not show up because you had a long week. This is when you need to be poured into. And dear friends, let me just tell you this as your pastor. If this place isn't fulfilling you, then find another house that is. You're like, he just said that? He's going to get in trouble? Maybe. But I'm honest. I want you to be poured into and filled. I want this place to become where you get amped up and ready for Monday. Like, God, I don't know what you're going to do in and through me this week, but I can't wait to encounter you because I got to experience you among my family. There's something about when we gather. God likes it when we gather. And the last thing that I'll say is this. Wholehearted worship, when we exist, when saved people are serving people, authentic and joy-filled worshipers, when we live this life, we reveal Jesus to the world. Romans says, hey, I want you to climb upon the altar and sacrifice your life, to willingly give up your life. I'm just going to close. I just want to introduce you to Jesus, if that's okay. Jesus says this in Mark chapter 10, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. I want to introduce you to Jesus. Jesus said this, now is the Son of Man glorified and God glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and glorify him at once. He says, yet, little children, while I am with you, you will seek me. And just as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. And then he says this, he says, a new commandment I give to you. He says this, that you would love one another just as I have loved you. You are to love one another. Can I ask you, are you loving? Just look around the room. Are you loving one another? Are you? Or are you only loving when it's convenient? Or are you only loving when you can make room? Or are you genuinely loving others like you want to be loved? He says, a new commandment I give to you. Can I just be honest in the moment? I think for a minute I would be looking around and I would look at Peter. I mean, man, you want me to love that guy? I mean, that dude, he just takes his foot out of his mouth to put the other one in. I mean, he's obnoxious. I look at Matthew and I'm like, man, you used to be a crook, man. I know your past, Matthew. I ain't gonna let you do my taxes. I'm gonna take some off the top. And then you'd look at Thaddeus and you're like, Thaddeus, you only made it on one page one time. Do something. Like, seriously, Thaddeus, what are you doing? He was one of the 12. You're like, I didn't know that. I know, because he's only on one page. Like, do something, Thaddeus. I think I'd look at James and John. I'm like, hey, where's your mama at? Why don't you go ask her if Jesus will let you sit on the right and left. I'd look at Judas and I'm like, man, there's something wrong with that one, I think. And I wonder what they would look at me and say, man, that guy's hard to love sometimes. But Jesus said, I have to love him like I love myself. And here's where the weight comes in, church. Jesus said this, by the way that I love you, in the way that you love me, in the way that we love one another, that's how the world would know we are his. So how does the world know you're his? I need to tell you this. You need to hear this from your pastor. This isn't a request. It is a command. He started with the language, a new commandment I give to you. He's like, hey, listen, some of y'all aren't going to get this, so I want you to write it down. Love as I have loved. Love the person you disagree with. Love the person that dresses weird. Love the person that you don't understand why they see the world that way. We are to love one another. Saved people serve people. Willingly, sacrificially. The Bible knows nothing of solitary religion. The Bible knows nothing of independent religion. The life of the disciple is about knowing Jesus and making him known and showing the world the love that we have for one another. Christ likeness then is sacrificial generosity, sacrificial servanthood. The life of the follower of Jesus is not when, but how. How can I give you more? And it's out of this freedom, this love that we've experienced. It just flows out of us. So when you aren't here or you're not in biblical community, something's missing. We don't have a sign out there, but have you ever seen the one that says something is missing and it says CH and there's a space and then it says RCH and it's the letter U? Pastors, we just do weird stuff. We can't help it. But it's true. You're missing in the church. Your contribution. Yes, your tithe. Yes, your sacrificial serving. Yes, opening your home and doing biblical community. Yes, sitting around the table and helping one another spiritually form to be imitators of Christ. I don't want you to be missing around the table because saved people serve people. Your life is worship. So will you be a living sacrifice? Your family is worship. Will you become the priest of your home? Your work is worship. Will you walk in wisdom and find ways to serve those you're working alongside? Yes, your finances are a part of worship. Will you figure out how to just be sacrificial in your generosity? Church, we're going to come to the table, but can I just tell you this? We did a study this year. And if you're tithing, man, thank you so much. If you're giving your 10%, you've already taken that step, man, praise be to God. But we found at the end of last year that if every family in this church would just be at 5%, and I'll just say, how do you know that? How do you know how much money we make? We did the lowest income in the state of Oklahoma. So if you're above that, praise be to God. We found that if every family would just give 5%, that we wouldn't have a financial need in this house. You're like, well, the Bible calls for a tithe. Oh, it most certainly does. It says that's the starting place. What I'm asking you is, will you step out in faith and just start with sacrificial giving? Will you step out in faith and will you become a part of a city group and will you help lead a city group? Open your house, open the table. And we're going to respond in communion. The reason that we come to this table is because we are reminded of the goodness and the sacrifice of Jesus. When he tells us to sacrifice our lives, to give of ourselves, he's not asking us to do something that he has not already done. And so we are reminded of that.